Hello, everyone. Welcome to Educating Deaf and Hard of Hearing Students Inclusively. My name is Trina. I'm the outreach coordinator for the Gala School for the Deaf. Hello, my name is Laura T. Petersen, and I work here for the California School for the Deaf as a early intervention outreach specialist for ages 1 to 5. Okay, now we're going to get started. Our first slide is just for a student panel, and we're hoping that they're going to be joining us today. However, as we're getting towards the end of the year, there's a lot of end of year testing that needs to be done. So they actually may have to stay in their classroom for those purposes. We're going to be on video for them instead, and we're going to be here to answer any of your questions you may have. And please know that interrupt us at any time during our presentation for questions. You don't need to wait until the end. This is going to be an open dialogue and for us to have as much of a conversation as possible, okay?
So I'm going to start with the recordings of our students. Unfortunately, because of the schedule conflict, they could not be live. But I'll start with Destiny and her video. Destiny, tell us about you and your school experiences. Hi, my name is Destiny. This is my name sign on my cheek. I'm a sophomore. I don't wear hearing aids anymore. I wore them growing up, but I don't wear them because I prefer to listen to music on my headphones. I really love music and I can hear well. I did attend a mainstream school in Manteca. The school was called Stella Brockman, and they had a deaf program there. I attended both the mainstream classes and the deaf program classes. The mainstream classes were all through interpreters. Everything was through the interpreter and through spoken language. And I didn't feel like I fit at all. I was lost and I didn't feel like I was smart at all. Then my dad found out that there was a school for the deaf. And so we drove and visited Fremont together and everybody was signing, but I only use signed exact English. Jasmine, tell us what you want to do for a career. I have so many things that I want to do. I want to become a lawyer, a doctor, a kindergarten teacher, so many different things. Maybe have my own business. I love being active and learning. Destiny, what advice would you give to other families with a deaf or hard of hearing child? I would recommend families take their child to the deaf school starting at kindergarten all the way through and learn sign and show that you love them.
Make mom stay at Michael's with big bogle.
Logan, tell us about yourself.
Wait,
Hello.
sorry.
Logan, tell us about yourself. Hello, my name is Logan Malachi, or you can use my name sign, which is an L on the side of my head. I am a junior in high school. I'm the class of 2025. I don't use hearing aids or cochlear implants. I stopped using my hearing aids when I was 5. I grew up in the Sacramento area, Northern California area. That's where I grew up. Like Roseville and Lincoln and Folsom. Logan, tell us about you and your family. So we are a family of 5. I'm hard of hearing. My mom became hard of hearing later in life. My dad is hearing, and my brother is hearing, and my sister is deaf. We use typically American Sign Language and English to communicate at home. There's 3 of us in the family that have disabilities. I have autism and ADHD. Logan, tell us about you and your school experiences. I like to watch movies, eat, go out, hang out, and do Lego sets together. The school I went to before the California School for the Deaf was Dewey Elementary. It was a mainstream program. I was there from kindergarten to 5th grade. When I joined this school, the California School for the Deaf, I felt more accepted. I felt like there was more cultural interaction for me. I joined in middle school. I started here in 6th grade. And I've been here ever since. I've been here for a long time now, for the past 7 years. Tell us about the extracurricular activities you were involved in. The activities that I'm involved in are APIC, Junior NAD, and drama. APIC is the Asian Pacific Islanders Club. And I'm also part of Junior NAD, which is a sister agency of the National Association for the Deaf. I'm also involved in the CSD drama program. I'm also part of a work experience program here at CSD in the culinary program. My goal is to become a chef for a whole lot of people. And we got one more.
I had in my junior high school, I didn't have glasses back then, and my eyesight was fading severely. So I often had trouble trying to pay attention to the board. And then I also had no interpreter to help me there. I was all by myself while in mainstream. While I was in junior high school, there was just one teacher in history. I sat in the middle of the class, away from the whiteboard, away from the TV. I couldn't hear or see anything. I could understand the subject based on my ability to read, but other than that, I was blocked from from completely learning the entire unit of history I was learning. I couldn't see or hear anything. And then after that, I came here to TSD, and the difference is I learned more easier and more, I have more understanding of the subject I'm studying.
Once everything's perfectly organized, I'll start with
Okay, so that was a few of our students. They were on a panel. And I think now is a good time just to check in with you all to see if you have any questions relating to the videos.
Our chat, the chat picture disappeared, so we're just fixing that.
Okay, I do see 2 comments. Someone has said, wow, Logan is very busy. And yes, we do have fun. There was one exception to the school here at California School for the Deaf. We have access to all opportunities. So the students have an opportunity to many different choices of what they need to do to make sure they get the access that they need to get involved in these activities. The next one says, they're not only included in one thing, except the staff is providing accessibility for the students in the area.
So I'm going to read the comment. Being solo is not inclusive, period, especially if staff do not provide an accessible learning environment. And I think that's really, Isamu was really commenting about his experience in the mainstream and not having access.
I'm going to talk a little bit more about that relating to your comments. It's going to be in our presentation today.
Yeah, it's always a little bit of a challenge because we don't know, we can't see you, so we don't know who our audience is. But as we said, feel free to interrupt us at any time with your questions. We are more than open.
Now we're going to be talking about inclusion and what that looks like for a deaf child in the classroom. Normally in a classroom, the students are missing a lot of communication and equitable things going on around with their peers. There's a lot of side conversations that's happening that they cannot understand, and they're missing that information. Most of the time, they get tired of asking people what was said or asking them to repeat themselves. Often there is only one interpreter in the classroom, and it's very impossible for them to catch everything. So often the interpreter tries to just focus on what the teacher says and not their peers. Therefore, the student feels it is what it is and miss that information. They already feel different from their peers and they start to experience bullying or feel less than the other students in the classroom. It could be because they're deaf, therefore they're different. They're also embarrassed of their sign language because there is no other student in the class that communicates the way they do. Their peers have a different language than they do. There's also a sense of isolation. They're the only one that's using the interpreter, or sometimes they may use an FM system that's be able provided during recess. Or sometimes the interpreters have the FM system. Well, wherever they go, whether it's playtime, lunchtime, or any after school activities, they typically don't offer this system. So they're very limited to the opportunity that they have in the classroom. There's also that feeling of belonging, There's also the feeling of feeling like an imposter, or maybe people won't understand me, oh, I don't understand them. And then there's a lot of miscommunications and misunderstandings. Sometimes the interpreter is conveying the message, and when the student looks down at the textbook or to take notes, um, or maybe just to see what their peers are doing and saying within the classroom, then they miss the information that's conveyed through the interpreter. So the interpreter have to continue simultaneous interpretation during the teacher's lecture. Um, so that typically means a deaf student don't catch all of that information. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. We'll provide an example, but hearing people have the ability to look in other directions and still hear what's happening in the room. While a deaf individual does not have that luxury, they have to focus on the interpreter 100% of the time. Also, there is eye fatigue. When you're watching an interpreter consistently for long periods of time, it can hurt the eyes. And also being able to translate a language from ASL to English simultaneously, there's materials and notes that needs to be made, can be very exhausting. And especially if you're doing it all day with an interpreter. I'm going to switch interpreters.
And doing it on an all-day basis, all the students will frequently miss things because it has to be continuous all day. Plus, they have to do the reading, take in all the instructions. Often they'll need repetition because of stuff they missed earlier, and it all amounts to a larger load. And then when they get home, you've got homework on top of it, and that can take much longer to do than for the rest of the students. So it's like a double load. You know, a deaf student tends to depend on visual things, and they will clue into that. And there's not an awful lot of direct visual learning. Most of it's auditory, so students will tend to miss that, even though they're doing their best to pay attention. Now, when you put that all together, you know, do you really have the same access to language in the same way as the hearing students? And often, no, it does not amount to parity. I mean, true inclusion. I mean, theoretically, every student, you know, in the best case situation, if you have teachers who sign and students who sign, then you have actual inclusion. Everybody's equal.
Yeah, so we understand the idea behind inclusion, and the intentions are good. However, the biggest issue for our deaf and hard of hearing students is language and language access. And so that's where inclusion kind of assumes that an interpreter is going to provide that, or an FM system, or the CART is going to provide that, and that is not equity. So I don't see any questions. We'll go on to the next slide.
You know, you're familiar with the concept of LRE, least restrictive environment. And that you have in a deaf school. A deaf school offers true parity, true equality. I'm going to expand on that. True access in a classroom means that everybody's on the same footing. Everyone is able to talk and communicate with each other. And it's like, oh, as a deaf student, you're like, oh, I can say something. I can communicate directly with the teacher. I can share my ideas. I can brainstorm. It's easy for me to follow what the topic is. I can ask questions. You know, I can participate equally in projects. And you get the full educational experience, and you have the same opportunities all the other students do. And ideally, you would have access to both ASL and English 100% of the time. And with that socialization, there are opportunities for leadership. People can think, you know, I can, with everyone signing, I'm like, I can do things after school. I can help join different clubs. I can compete in sports. I mean, everything is available to me. And I can become a leader, a student leader in the school. Why? Because everybody signs and everybody has equal access. And that's just one example. I'm sorry. Like Logan, as Logan said. Okay, and also at a deaf school for the deaf, there are opportunities. Students have access to role models. You'll have deaf teachers and deaf staff, all of whom sign, and many of them will be exposed to students who have deaf families. And you have access to all of this at a school for the deaf. Students can see the different opportunities they have and the positives, and they're able to make connections with people, and they can develop within the deaf community. They can become leaders. That possibility is there. And when you're in a hearing school, that's a whole litany of things you simply don't have access to. And a school for the deaf, the classroom is full of visual material, visual information. The walls are covered. And like, for example, some grades will have a word wall, which will have lists of words, and they'll show signs that can be used to represent the same concept. And then next to that, you have a picture of the object, or some artistic representation of the underlying concept, and the student can make the connections between the three. Again, you're getting access to all the information. And teachers are able to communicate directly with the students. There's no need to go through the intermediary of an interpreter. A teacher can interrupt a student can interrupt the teacher and say, "Could you back up a little bit? Could you explain that part again?" And what we have is, well, for the deaf, you have teachers who sign fluently, and if there are sentences, so to speak, you can compare the two. But also, if there's students not paying attention, the teacher can pull things to a halt. It's like, "Okay, are you looking at me?" Okay, and then continue. And at School for the Deaf, also you have access to a full deaf curriculum, including deaf history, and enables students to develop a sense of deaf identity. Students can engage, know who they are as deaf individuals, and they see deaf individuals who have accomplished things in the past, and they're like, "Okay, I can do the same thing. That's something I can do." Okay, I'm going to pause now and take a look at what's in the chat.
I see a question that says, can you share more about access to education and community to deaf disabled students and how you're supporting inclusion in deaf spaces for students with additional disabilities? Yeah, so this all applies to, yes, the deaf schools, which there are 2 in the state of California, Fremont and Riverside. There are also other public school deaf programs that have that critical mass and the number of students as well. Here at the California School for the Deaf, we do have general education, and we have what we call alternative curriculum for students who need that extra support, or maybe have autism, or maybe have other things going on. So they can be with a teacher who can provide that extra support and adapt the curriculum so that it's accessible to them. So we do have that here. We often do bring, like Trina was saying, deaf role models who may be deaf blind, maybe have autism themselves, deaf and autistic. So we do try to expose all of our students so that they all have role models to look up to. Let's see, other comments.
And there's another comment that even with the best interpreters, there are still gaps. For example, myself, as a GEAT student in
Here, James, I'll read it.
I'm sorry, I can't enlarge the screen, and I'm looking at something.
I totally get it. It's all good. It's all good.
And that's a perfect example of what's happening right now with the presentation. You can see the interpreter is not able to catch everything, like my finger spelling particularly. and maybe the interpreter could be a top interpreter, but there will still be barriers, obstacles to clear communication and transmission of information. So the interpreter have to interrupt and we have to back up. And it's frequently not the interpreter's responsibility. It's just what happens when you have this kind of a information chain system.
So just reading the comment that Trina already signed is that even with the best interpreters, we have access that is not always there, just like what is happening to Trina, an EDD student, but it's not the interpreter's fault. Most schools do not have interpreters as competent as the interpreters we have in this workshop. Most of them did not pass the EIPA. So some school districts changed positions from classroom interpreters to teachers' aides to assist communication for deaf and hard of hearing children. This is not inclusive. Direct instruction with the deaf and hard of hearing critical mass is inclusive. All right. And then we have another question. So have the interpreter keep signing even though Laura is speaking or reading from the thing so that we all have access. So how do we support our LEAs with maintaining growing programs to support deaf and hard of hearing, deaf blind, deaf plus, so that they have inclusion with deaf programs, especially when the student doesn't live close to a school for the deaf? I'm just thinking, I read the question, but I'm now trying to think about the question. So how do we support programs to have inclusive programs? So one of the things, I work here at the California School for the Deaf in the core department, which is our curriculum, outreach, resources, and education. We do our best to provide trainings, resources, curriculum to other schools out there. We realize that, deaf education is really a small, specific, field, and not everybody can be experts. And so we try to support the teachers and LEAs that are out there with the resources that we have. We do webinars as well to provide that training, but we'll also go out specifically to schools to provide that training as well.
And the next comment says, way up in the north, it can be a 5-hour drive.
There are children who travel from here to there for school and stay for the week. What kind of emotional supports do you have for kids who are traveling far from home?
Our concept here is, again, the interpreters.
Cottages?
Cottages. Okay. Our cottages here, same idea as a dorm. We call them cottages. It just gives a more homey feel. And our staff here really they've been very supportive of the students who are here. They arrive, we help, the staff helps them settle down, provides them with different activities, opportunities to socialize, to actually say network with that. And they're able to participate fully in the school. The cottages become like their home during the week. And this is a wonderful experience for the students. They are able to experience full access to everything because everybody signs, all the staff sign. And they get the opportunity to go home every Friday. They can get on the bus. There's a bus. There are some staff on the bus to travel with them. So they still are able to communicate with people. And then when they arrive home, we have emotional support available. We're available to them all the time. We have counseling. We have a counseling department here. It also adds support, and they also sign as well. Anything to add? Okay, let's see the next question here, comment. Okay.
I'll do this one, James. James, it's all right. So this is a comment from Julie Rimes Samario. Laura is going to read the comment. There are some students who have no communication at home when they go home on Friday. They have, oh wait, sorry, I'm reading the wrong one. This is why, yeah, start again. Sorry. This is why CSD has a residential program where the students, with the students going home every Friday, while during the week they have video phone access with their families. And, you know, the students kind of see CSD like camp, and they're excited for when they go home during the weekend. So it's really, we really coordinate that plan for the students. It's a great arrangement, 24/7 access to language opportunities during the week. Let's see, another comment that says there are some students who have no communication at home, and they really look forward to coming back to the school for where they can have full access and communication, like with Logan and Destiny, who were on the panel, who they themselves, they live on campus. They are cottage students. This is very important. This is my first time on this topic. So the important, oh, sorry, go ahead, Vern.
Now, the deaf school provides equal access with American Sign Language and teaching language in general. So I want to also add, there's also equity, equality experience for the deaf students.
So I think a lot of us in special education know the term a LRE, which is in the IDEA law means least restrictive environment. And what we know for deaf students, they, like I said already, is the big issue is language and language access and access to incidental learning and all of that, is they need a language-rich environment that is accessible to them. So what we mean by a language-rich environment, or otherwise the least restrictive environment, is being able to have full access, being able to talk directly to peers, to teachers, to you know, staff. So having everybody being able to sign, because we know, regardless of hearing levels, we know that everybody can pick up American Sign Language and have access that way. And they can also be able to express themselves fully. They have access to incidental learning. They can see a conversation between a couple of peers or a couple of staff people and kind of and catch, you know, figure out what's going on and maybe even join the conversation, which that's often experience not available in other school environments. They have access to all the discussions and oftentimes feel much more confident as a result and do not feel like second-class citizens, which is often what happens when they are feeling left out of most of the conversations when they're in other school environments, mainstream school environments.
So inclusivity means education, but all other parts of what that encompasses. Because we do notice that a deaf individual do have specific needs. Yet because of that, we have to be able to develop an AB 1836. Next slide, please. Okay. So Deaf Child Bill of Rights, and that's to make sure that all of our deaf students receive their specific needs. And we make sure that their language access provide them with opportunities to be able to socialize with other deaf individuals, as well as opportunities to be incorporated in any type of situation in their environment. And now we're going to give you a little bit of background about me and how I was brought up. I grew up oral, and that's very specific to a teaching model where a deaf student is forced to speak instead of sign, and it becomes forbidden for them to sign at that time. I couldn't be involved in my yearbook because I didn't really understand what was happening. There was no access for me at that time. That's when I felt like second-class citizen. Like I am not considered as an equal to my peers. I definitely felt different. I felt alone. I felt as if I had no future. So this Bill of Rights, I can imagine in my time, if that was present, I wouldn't have been able to say, hey, I want to be part of the yearbook. You know, it provides me an equal opportunity. And I think that's very important for us to recognize that. The oral program is something we're seeing today. So it's important that you are aware that we continue to teach individuals about the options that they have. They can have access to an interpreters or access to sign language, but oral schools, they are prohibited. Is there anything you'd like to add, Laura? Okay.
I think it's just important that deaf kids are different from other kids in special education, and that's because of the language access, and that's why we needed to develop this Deaf Child's Bill of Rights, because just placing them in a classroom with all the best intentions does not provide that access. So there's a comment that says, in spite of this state law, the Deaf Child Bill of Rights, there is heavy resistance by several IEP teams to refer students to the California Schools for the Deaf. We need a space to unpack ableism and autism, as well as implicit bias towards deaf educators and ASL, along with intersectionality.
Okay, can we go to the previous slide, please? Now I want an opportunity to emphasize inclusion and what that typically means. You're encouraging the student to socialize with other non-disabled students. You don't want them to feel separated or isolated. And I think that's important to emphasize right now. And that will be the same for deaf students. They shouldn't feel excluded from the environments because they're deaf and only isolated to other deaf individuals. They should feel included. And that should be their educational experience.
I just want to add that some of the educators out there, special ed, have been framing deaf programs, the schools for the deaf, as segregated schools. And we really do not want to use that. That is not an appropriate term. That is a very derogatory term. Like I said, the school programs and deaf schools that have a critical mass of deaf students, that have teachers who can provide that direct instruction for these students, those are the least restrictive environment. They are not segregated schools or programs.
Yeah, I also wanted to add that because this deaf school has a wide range of deaf students, and there we welcome students who are deaf, some that have minimal hearing loss, all the way to profoundly deaf. Next slide, please.
Sorry, you jumped ahead, but then
Slides are moving around, trying to get it figured out.
One of the things that is often said during IEP meetings or whatever, it's like, oh, but the child is, the student's hard of hearing, or they have a mild or moderate hearing. They don't belong in a deaf program where they are using mainly, ASL, American Sign Language. The reality is those students with mild, moderate hearing, they are, the statistics show that they are 10 times more likely to be behind academically and can experience behavior problems. They're 35% likely to experience failing grades or need more assistance. So even if a child is hard of hearing, mild, moderate, they still need that access and that attention, because if you're spending a lot of your time, if you don't want school to be a test of their listening abilities, like a hearing test, you don't want school to be a hearing test. You want them to be able to go, oh, they're talking about, US history and the Spanish-American War. You want them to be able to be thinking about the Spanish-American War, not whether what that person said, what exactly that person just said, and trying to decode, spend all their time decoding versus just taking it in and learning.
And there's 2 comments here in the chat. So all individuals have a right to be educated and exist in settings in which they feel authentically belonging. And then a follow-up comment to that is, yes, it's very important. This is my first time on this specific topic. Hold on. Because there tends to be some misunderstandings. Hold on. The interpreter's missing the comment.
Oh, Vern, I'll read it. I'll go ahead and read it. Go ahead.
A lot going on in the chat.
So I'll back up. There's a lot of misunderstandings about the LRE, least restrictive environment, for deaf students and high school hearing students, leading to more unintended harm and traumas such as language deprivation, social isolation, and identity crises, whether it's intentional or unintentional.
Okay, let's just have a quick time check.
We have 15 minutes.
We have 15 minutes left. So I just wanted to make sure if you had any questions so far. Okay.
So special education, it tends to, if in a mainstream environment, tends to focus on the student's weakest sense, their hearing, right? So oftentimes they're listening with, assistive hearing devices, whether it be cochlear implants, hearing aids, using an FM system. They may have some accommodations in addition to that with interpreters, note takers, cart captioning systems. And the intentions, I understand, are all good behind this. But often, and one of the challenges is often students are trying so hard to fit in that they're not going to complain, and they're going to just keep trying to fit in. This picture that you see on the screen, I think really, this is an adult who is looking back on their experience, their education experience, and just felt like all that pressure, realizing there was a lot of pressure to make them as a deaf child fit into this square of being a hearing child. And it compressed me, making me feel like a small person. And that's I don't think that's none of us in the education field want a student to feel that way. And so we really need to really think and make sure that students who may not know anything else aren't going to feel that way once they are, finished with that school program.
I'll also add to that comment. You can also see in the comments, Laura's going to go ahead and read it.
I'm glad you are all witnessing how this setup is not the least restrictive environment for us. Now imagine the 14,000 children in mainstream settings who do not have the resources or language or both to self-advocate like we can. Sorry, the comment moved. Yeah, sorry. So we must have this discussion during SIP conferences. Yeah, okay. I think, and then read. And then the next comment from Heather says, yes, and why it's important to remember that inclusion is a continuum in which individuals receive services in the setting that is most appropriate for them.
And I would like to emphasize that it's important to be able to teach all students and everyone involved in the educational system, and like in a deaf school. Well, with their having the deaf school, we won't have the options to have equal access. And this last comment.
I don't have to imagine it. It was my life experience, and I work with some of these 14,000 students.
With that in mind, for example, as far as an IEP goes.
So the IDEA law was updated in 2004 with special factors that were specific to deaf and hard of hearing children, because they realized that the IDEA law did not, the special education law did not address the specific needs of deaf students. So the law requires that the IEP team needs to address what's the student's primary language, and are there strong language models provided? Is the student able to learn in that language? The other one is, are there opportunities for direct communication with peers? And I know this can be sticky because it's like, oh yeah, the kid, is having some conversations with their peers, but are they really? Are they just staying at a very superficial level? Or are they really having discussions? So, so I'm going to read Mary's comment. It says, one of the concerns I have is that hearing forward thinkers are making the decisions regarding the placement of deaf and hard of hearing students. What is the best way to educate IEP teams and other decision makers as to how to provide LRE for our students?
Like to comment on that, or that specific comment can be addressed here. Also, you can contact us at EDD. We have some resources and information we can give you on that. And there are special fairs that are available here, and they provide opportunities for leadership. Okay, next comment.
I agree. There is great need to train the schools in what it means for deaf and hard of hearing children to belong. There's lots of misunderstandings about LRE for deaf and hard of hearing students. Oh. Wait.
Oh, okay.
Okay. I was reading that one. Leading to more unintended harm and traumas such as language deprivation, social isolation, and identity crisis. And then the comment responded that that's why full inclusion does not work for all deaf children, regardless of their hearing level. Teachers and staff are not very patient with deaf students, and it's frustrating to teach them how to work with deaf students. Deaf-centric programs in schools are essential. And then another comment in response to that, yes, and why it's important to remember that inclusion is a continuum with individuals receive services and settings that are most appropriate for them. And this is where we can discuss further. And the LAO, another comment says, according to the LAO report, that only 18% of deaf children and 35% of hard of hearing children are on grade level in mainstream settings. So this LRE concept needs to be revisited. I think we got another comment. The best way is for professional development and coaching by the deaf education experts available at the California Department of Education Unit. Yes, CSDs are schools in the California Department of Education. So let's see what we have left in our presentation. I think.
Okay, we have 5 minutes left. So I'd like to wrap up with questions or any final thoughts.
We really appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion, to discuss this topic. And you have our contact information here if you want to follow up with us. If you're a teacher at a program and wants resources or training, feel free to reach out to us. There's a comment that says, this is an excellent presentation. I am relieved to see this workshop as part of the SIP conference. We need to see more of this. Looks like there's one more message and then, all right. We see some thank yous. We want to thank you too.
Thank you for joining us.
And on behalf of the entire SIP team, I want to say thank you so much to you for being here and representing a community that is often underrepresented. We hear and see all of the comments, and we as a team are dedicated to making sure that everyone is feeling a true sense of belonging. So thank you so much, Trina. Thank you so much, Laura. This was very valuable. Please, everyone, take a little break. There's more DJ music. She's a great dancer, and join us again.
Heather, can I also thank the interpreters as well, and Jane as well for providing that access.
To our interpreters, our Spanish interpreter. Thank you, everyone, for making this a team effort. We hope you enjoy the rest of your time with us and have a fantastic day. Thank you both. Thank you all.